When Vin Sullivan stepped up as an editor in the early days of what would become DC Comics, he also stepped into a variety of other roles as needed. After all, comics as an industry was entirely new, and there were plenty of wrinkles to be ironed out. One such wrinkle was an absolute lack of writers on staff. So Vin decided to reach out to an old schoolmate of his, someone he knew was a major fan of science fiction with a penchant for writing, Gardner Fox. Vin approached Gardner and made him an offer to join them as an independent comic book writer. This is a moment that forever changed DC, and the comic book industry as a whole. Gardner's response? What in the world is a comic? Today we're talking about Gardner Fox, one of DC's most prolific writers, creator of The Flash, The Sandman, Batgirl, and literally hundreds of other characters and stories. Before we begin, remember to leave a like on the video if you enjoy it, and if you like me and what I'm doing here, go ahead and subscribe. So, to the newbies, welcome, and to the oldies, welcome back. Let's talk about DC Comics. Up front, I'll let you know that I did some hefty research with this one, but one of the most robust resources was definitely Jennifer DeRoss's Forgotten All-Star, a biography of Gardner Fox. I won't rely on it too much because, well, being honest, a lot of the things within the book are only tangentially related or too speculative to be reliably factual, but it's worth mentioning as I'll be citing it a few times throughout the video. Gardner Fox was born in New York in 1911, son to Leon Fox and Julia Gardner. Yep, they gave him the old Martha Clark special and named him after his mother's maiden name. Gardner was born into a wealthy socialite family which deeply affected the way he turned out. He barely felt a tremor when the Great Depression struck, and importantly, could buy as many books as he wanted, which he did constantly. Gardner was deeply inspired by the works of Jules Verne and the John Carter sci-fi series. I think this is most obvious with one of his favorite creations, Hawkman, also known as Carter Hall. I'm going to mention up top that Fox was a polymath. The best comparison I can make is that he had the same neurotic energy as Brennan Lee Mulligan or Brian David Gilbert. Everything was meticulous and specific with him, and he never stopped learning, no matter the actual practical value of what he learned. Random science facts, Egyptian mythology, really anything that would pique his interest. Growing up, he had a variety of interests, ranging from literature to sports to games to history. He was particularly a fan of the Mets and the Jets, and was a member of multiple literary organizations. Then, in a situation that seems underexplored with regard to the hows and whys, Gardner Fox ran into some trouble with the law at age 18. He and a friend were apprehended by police for carrying firearms into a park in New York. The judge was really lenient. Fox claimed ignorance of the law, and he and his pal only got charged $25 each, equal to $450 today. The judge even let them keep the guns. Fox must have thought he sweet-talked the judge pretty well, because a few years later he was a law school graduate. Next, let me paint you a picture. It's a New York house party. Gardner's been invited and is making his way around, shaking some hands and enjoying himself. It's a party, after all, and Gardner has been raised to be a social creature. Someone he knows invites him to play this brand new board game that everybody is raving about. You might have heard of it. It's called Monopoly. Gardner takes a seat at the table, and directly across from him is her, Linda Negrini. The two of them get along fantastically, and she's also a wealthy socialite, meaning that In the weird world of upper-class society, it makes sense that they should be together. Don't get me wrong though, it seems like Gardner and Linda did genuinely love each other, but their shared social status just made it easier, for lack of a more nuanced way to phrase it. Gardner was romantic and a writer at heart, so he would often give her gifts like flowers, chocolates, or something more personalized, and always included a love poem that he wrote himself. Some of them even get a little racy. 2 years after meeting, they get married. They had their ups and downs. Their children and later grandchildren would describe it as complex, which what relationship isn't, but they stuck together all the way until Gardner's passing. So, now that we have a better grasp on Fox's life, let's talk about the part of our story that's actually about comic books. Gardner Fox was practicing law when his old pal Vin tapped him to write for DC, and didn't want the two realms to interfere with one another, so he used a pseudonym. I'm meticulous too, and I've tried to put out these videos in timeline order, but that pseudonym really threw my timeline out of whack. He joined NAP, the precursor to DC Comics, in June 1937, but didn't use his real name until a year later, so I missed it. Sorry. Just wanted to explain my own snafu. But Gardner used lots of pseudonyms over time, like it was a hobby of his. The guy used 37 fake names in his writings. He went on to write pretty much wherever they needed him, and quickly wound up doing work for Batman, adding a few things that have become synonymous with our beloved Dark Knight, like his utility belt, Batarang, and the autogyro, which I'm going to argue is a precursor to the Batwing. He also gave Scarecrow his famous fear toxin. The guy was basically a dude in a scratchy brown potato sack before Fox lent a hand. Now, being a polymath, Gardner Fox's brain was just chock full of random fun facts, and he loved writing these out on the page, usually not long after he initially learned that fact. This was more for his own entertainment, but this satisfaction only grew once he realized that he was bringing these fun snippets of information to people by writing them in. That he was exposing readers to information they otherwise may never have known. After 2 years of writing in the comic book industry while also practicing law, Fox stepped away from the courtroom. I've got a quote from Sheldon Mayer here about why, thanks to the biography by Jennifer DeRoss. Quote, Mayer describes Fox as being too gentle a guy to be a successful lawyer. According to Mayer, Fox's career as a lawyer ended when, in the middle of court, he realized his client was simply wrong and the other side was right. He said as much out loud in the midst of the trial. End quote. With that, Gardner Fox made the switch to comic writing as his only source of income. To meet his growing family's financial expectations, he essentially poured himself into constant work, becoming the second most prolific writer in the company's entire history. Thus began his career proper, with a few oddities that I can't not talk about. First, Gardner had a few uncommon hobbies that he picked up as a result of his wealth, most excitingly being fencing. He would often fence as a way to brainstorm ideas, and even invited his coworkers over so that they could share ideas while sparring. Imagine being invited over to a coworker's home to work on a project together, and he just chucks a fencing foil at you and goes, "On guard!" It's one hell of a way to get your blood pumping. He also preferred working from home, which wasn't particularly unusual in the comic industry, but he'd also invite the editors and artists to join him there, so it wasn't exactly about being secluded, but more likely that he just didn't want to get stuck in that lovely New York traffic. Fox was an utter machine when it came to writing. He'd just keep jotting down scripts on his otherwise unused legal pad for 8 hours a day, with a continuous stream of iced coffee provided by Linda. I find this a little neat that Fox was so ahead of the trend when it came to the right way to drink coffee. Another thing, maybe a little tangential, but Gardner loved board games and was an absolute stickler for the rules. He'd play games with his wife, his children, and even later his grandchildren, and never gave them any leeway. In his mind, if they didn't beat him entirely by their own skill, they didn't deserve to win. See what I said earlier about him being neurotic? So, anyways, Pearl Harbor. World War II had been ongoing for a while, and Fox was very aware of the effect it was having, even on the home front. Keep in mind, a majority of DC's staff at the time were Jewish and personally impacted by what had already transpired by that point. But following the attack on American soil, Gardner decided to follow the footsteps of his ancestors and serve his country as a soldier. He was denied. He was rejected by the military, citing his, quote, horrible eyesight and colorblindness. Fox was surprised to discover that he was blue-green colorblind, which, yeah, can we bring up that picture of the Sandman again? Filter it? Yeah, that makes more sense now. So, he wasn't able to fight in the war. Now what? Well, a couple things. A lot of his co-workers did join the military, and he decided to fill in the lack of writers himself during their absences, and even wrote under their names so readers wouldn't notice they were suddenly not writing anymore amidst a worldwide war. Gardner Fox also created a character named Dr. Midnight around this time, a superhero who could still manage to help and save the day despite the fact that he was blind. I think Fox was trying to process some feelings there. He also, like many other writers during this period, wrote stories that revolved around the war pretty frequently. Most of his characters wound up joining the army, fighting enemy invaders, inviting readers to buy war bonds, or some combination of these. But these efforts on the page weren't enough for him. Fox learned that there were a few people like himself, and they usually joined into civil defense programs to help on the homeland side of the war. So he got to work in his spare time doing things like organizing emergency evacuation routes and helping with the construction of bomb shelters. World War II concluded in the way we're all familiar with. Most of his co-workers returned, though not all, and life simply went along. Come 1951, and we get into a more fun detail of Gardner's career. It's no secret that DC had a trend in the 50s of including gorillas on their covers, and it's all thanks to him. See, Gardner was writing a story for Strange Adventures, like any other, but this one in particular had a focus on a gorilla. To everyone's surprise, the comic in particular sold absurdly well compared to the others. Fox had an inkling as to why this could be, and decided to write a gorilla into his next comic. They slapped a gorilla on the cover again, and it was clear a trend had been set. This proved so successful, in fact, that DC had to eventually impose a limit to how often a gorilla could appear on one of their covers, a limit of 1 per month. Roll the clock forward a couple more years, and Gardner takes on another life-changing step, this time while laid up with a severe cold. He's bedridden, pretty literally, and decides that the only thing he can really do is write. But he shouldn't work on anything he's being paid for, because what if it turns out bad? So he starts work on a novel. It's unclear if he wrote the whole thing while sick or only some amount of it, but the resulting work became his first novel, The Borgia Blade. It sold fairly well, and writing novels quickly became a secondary pursuit for Fox. The 1960s marked another particularly notable point of Gardner Fox's career, as he introduced something into DC Comics that would heavily impact, well, arguably all of media. the multiverse. He wrote The Flash of Two Worlds, a narrative that acknowledged the existence of the Golden Age reality of Earth 2 and the Silver-Aged Earth 1, introducing the concept within the realm of comics. He even wrote himself into the story as a cheeky joke. Take a second here and consider the monumental impact of this story. The multiverse and alternate universes were such a rare concept outside of high-grade science fiction. And nowadays, we can hardly shut up about it. But things got a little dour for Fox in 1968. After an attempt to get DC to finally grant him the simple advantage of health benefits and medical insurance, he was denied with cold-hearted rejection. After all this time, he packed up his things and left DC behind him. At age 57, Gardner Fox was under an immense amount of stress. He had been working himself half to death every day since he was 18, and suddenly realized that now his only source of income was his novels, which weren't always guaranteed to sell well. A month or two later, Gardner went to a family Christmas party with Linda, and enjoyed himself just fine. But then, somebody playfully pointed out to her that Gardner seemed pretty drunk. Linda was terrified. Gardner didn't drink, and that night he hadn't been drinking. They called for a doctor. Gardner had suffered a stroke. He survived, and eventually fully recovered. Linda was confident that it was brought on by stress and by his treatment from the DC offices. After some time in recovery and some other freelance work, Gardner Fox took up a job with the lads over at Marvel and focused primarily on supernatural stories like Tomb of Dracula, Red Wolf, and some Doctor Strange. Then, following a writer's strike, Fox finally decided to give up on comics permanently and refocus on his novels. He'd had it with the industry. By the late 70s, Gardner considered himself fully retired, though he'd still write a book a year for his own entertainment. He and Linda moved to a retirement home in Cranberry to be closer to the grandkids, and he passed away on Christmas Eve in 1986. All in all, he appeared to greatly enjoy his time in retirement. He enjoyed playing games with the other seniors, spending time with his darling wife, and, as he described it, loafing. As is the case with many creators, Gardner Fox didn't get as much appreciation as he deserved, but he received plenty of awards and accolades during his time with us, and was loved dearly by his friends and family alike. And that's where we'll leave our story for now. If you really enjoyed this video, hopefully enough to have left a like and subscribed, you'll be happy to know that we also have a video available here on Vince Sullivan and some other details of DC's earliest days in the industry. Thanks for sticking with us. I'll see you in the next one.